Hey, welcome to this PK online event. I'm Sam and this is Paul. Paul's the National Director of PK New Zealand, and I've been serving under him for the last 2 years on the national board. You know, what I love about PK is we get to bring so many amazing speakers like Ironside, and I've known Aaron as a counsellor, as a pastor, and I've also played a bit of golf with him, and he's not too bad. He actually won a tournament the other day.
Yeah, Aaron's a friend of mine, and I've spent a fair bit of time with Aaron over the years, travelling with him, being on planes, talking about a lot of stuff. And this is one of the things that came off a very long plane journey, where we started to talk about being connected and friendship. And this message has evolved over a couple of years, to be fair. It started off with a bit as a breakfast, and it's developed and developed. So this is about being connected and having friends. So let's have a look.
I've had quite the experience over the last year or so with respect to friends, and I'm going to share some of those tales with you today as we think about this most troublesome part of our lives. You see, the problem is in online, you don't build friendships. You might get some followers, but not friends. And this is the challenge. I'm starting to realize that Facebook friends column makes me kind of chuckle because most of those people aren't friends. They're just people I used to know. They're not really my friends. My friends are found in real life. I do chuckle at this tweet, though, that we don't talk enough about the fact that the real miracle of Jesus is having 12 friends in your 30s. Many of us don't keep a very big friendship circle, and of course, the older we get, the more it narrows down and becomes very little indeed. Go into a lot of churches, you'll see something like this as the vision statement, right? Knowing God and making him known. It's a great vision statement. The thing is, it taps into something, doesn't it, that's in the heart of God, and because we're made in his image, is in the heart of man. Turns out we want to be known too. That we ache to be known. That God has made himself vulnerable to our rejection. He's not forcing humanity to know him. We must choose that. But in a very similar way, we experience something of the vulnerability and pain that God himself knows, that we too ache to be known. And that nobody makes anybody be friends with us. That friends are entirely voluntary unions, aren't they? Connecting. Yeah, we want to connect with God. This beautiful verse reminds us that, we are all connected together into Jesus. The problem is, how do we get this verse to become a reality? How do we turn this from theology into practice? Because it's easy to say, isn't it, that we're the body, that we're all connected, but in reality, many of us feel very unconnected. Very disconnected from each other. We need less theology of this and more practice. Today we're going to talk about the practice of it. Thankfully, the Bible has a lot of clues about the practice of it. The practice really comes down to this idea, the one another's. All these ways in which the New Testament talks about how Christians were known for the way they responded to one another. And so this is one of those times where you and I can go away from this place and really start to reflect on that list, because in there is some pretty good clues about how we might be genuinely connected to one another. There's lots of them. And friends, if church resembled this more, we might find that there are more sitting among us, because they're hungry for connection. So, here's the trouble. Many of us did not grow up in an environment where we learned how to do this. This is my dad, and my nephew Harlan, and my younger brother Troy, who's taller than me, but younger than me. And I think this is Harlan's 21st recently. He's looking happy, he's a great kid. Let me tell you about my dad. Recently I decided that since my dad's in his 80s, I didn't want to get caught short, because one day, heaven forbid, may it be a long time from now, but I'm going to have to deliver some kind of eulogy for him, right? And I realized, and this is a clue right from the get-go, that I barely knew the man's story. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to interview him. I spent my life on the radio. I know how to interview people. I'll go and interview my dad. So I organised this time to go and sit and interview. He's now turns 86 at the end of this month. And this is the story he told me that I'd never heard. He said, I kind of heard vague snippets of this. When I got into radio, he used to tell me, oh, I nearly got into radio, but when I went to do the audition with the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation back in the 1950s, I stuttered during the audition, and that was the end of that. So I knew that there was something about stuttering in my dad's past. He's never stuttered really in my presence, but as a child, apparently, he stuttered really profoundly. Now, his Christian name is Adrian, which you wouldn't have thought would be a name that a stutterer would struggle with, but apparently he couldn't say his name. So when he went to school, he tells me that the children would often taunt him and say, why won't you tell us your name? Don't you want to be friends with us? And he couldn't. He couldn't work out how to say it, how to communicate. And so he spent the first part of his childhood friendless. When he got to be about 11 or 12, my dad was quite a gifted sportsman, and so this became the way he'd connect with others. He played twice for the Canterbury B team in rugby union as a lock. He was quite good at rugby and at cricket. He made friends with a man named Kevin, and Kevin, during his teenage years, was his best friend, his only friend. And they played sport together, and this was the friend he'd always been waiting for. And when my dad was 19, Kevin took his life. So the one time my dad got a friend, that friend took his own life. My dad's never known many friends in his life. In the last few years, a man he'd met through the cricket club died of cancer, and I realised when seeing him at the funeral that even though I'd never known my dad to spend a great deal of time with this man was the only friend, really, that my dad had. So my dad wasn't able to teach me about friendship. He didn't know about friendship. He didn't know how to cultivate them. And quite frankly, he's had quite a lonely life as a result of that. So many of us will relate to my dad. We'll kind of feel like, yeah, I kind of know that story. Don't have a lot of friends, never really have. Not really sure how these friends work. And certainly, if I'd just taken my cue from my dad, I might have ended up in a very similar way. Instead, I want to tell you about my childhood best friend who's still one of my absolute best friends. For some reason, all my life I've collected Aarons. So this is another Aaron. I say that because in 2018, when I was going through that dark time and I was at PK, Aaron Moore and I became really great friends and have been ever since. I collect Aarons, always have. Maybe I'm just too dumb to learn a new name. I don't know. This isn't actually Aaron as a child. This is his son Matt as a child, but Matt looks just like Aaron. So I couldn't resist. When I was a kid, one thing I kind of worked out was that it was good to have a kind of a connection point with other kids. And for me, it was the fact that my dad was the coach of our cricket team, which meant that the gear bag lived at our house. And we lived literally on the same block as the primary school. So I would carry the gear bag to school a couple of times a week. And I would set up a full-on game of cricket at lunchtime. Pads, wickets, bats, the whole kit and caboodle. At the end of cricket, I'd packed down the bag one time and I was putting it away in the classroom. The teacher would guard the bag for me. And Aaron, age 7, comes to me. He says, you know what? This is a conversation between two 7-year-olds. He says, you know the only reason that they're friends with you is because you've got the gear bag. And I say this to him, two 7-year-olds, yeah, well, I'll take friends for some lunchtimes over friends for none. Two 7-year-olds talking, I'll be your friend without the gear bag. And we have been best mates for 40 years. Thank goodness he knew something more about friendship than I did, because he knew how to get past the superficial and make a genuine connection and a genuine friendship commitment. But here's the thing. When I got married, because what happens, your world just changes, and I had the church world was now a big part of my life, and that wasn't part of Aaron's world, and so our worlds were getting further and further apart. And I realized after about 5 years of marriage that Aaron and I were now only seeing each other once a year. And it wasn't enough. We were just spending the whole evening together, comparing notes about family. What's your brother doing? What's my brother doing? All that stuff. And I realized I don't even really know him anymore. I don't know if he likes his job. I don't know if his marriage is going well. I don't really know anything. Came to crunch one birthday where I wanted to invite him to something, but he had moved houses. And because he's a high-profile police officer, his number isn't listed. And for some reason, I didn't have his phone number. And so I had to find the phone number of an old high school friend who I knew would still be friends with him. And then she asked him to give me the number, and he said yes. And then the number came back to me. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't even have Aaron's phone number anymore. Like, this is nuts. This friendship is dying. So I decided to do something very brave, and I hope that you'll take the cue here today. I decided to open up a conversation about it. So I said, we need to have dinner again soon. So we went around to his house, but this time I took him outside onto the deck. I said, I need to talk to you. And this is what I said to him. I'll be honest, I'm really unhappy where our friendship's up to. I feel like all we ever do is catch up around our families. We only see each other once a year. I don't really know how you're doing, and I'm sad, and I miss our friendship. And I just want to know, what do you want? And he looked up, and he's a cop, man. He is not prone to being soft and mushy like me. And he looked up with misty eyes and said, I am incredibly lonely, and I long for our friendship. And so we made a commitment that day that we would see each other at least once every 6 weeks, and have done ever since for the last 15 years. I propositioned him for an upgrade on the friendship. And it worked. Now, before you go home and start ringing people, I have to tell you that I've also done that proposition and had it fall flat. So I got to let you know, it doesn't always work. But I tell you what it does do, it means we get on the same page real fast about the nature of our friendship. This is what happened a couple of years ago. CLC strikes again. This is my second cousin, Dave. I've put Cousins Explained because I never knew how to work out which cousin was which. Our grandmothers were sisters. And his grandmother, my Auntie Joan, was much more like a grandmother to me because she was much younger than my grandmother. And when my grandmother died, she was the replacement. So we had this lovely connection. But I didn't really know Dave as a kid. He's 3 years younger than me. He's quite a quiet, introverted personality, and we didn't really know each other. So back a couple of years now, Siossi says to me, Dave's marriage has broken down and I'm going to see him. He's going through a real tough time. Do you want to come? And I'm like, man, I don't even know Dave. I mean, yeah, technically he's a relative. I don't know him. And I certainly don't want to meet him in the context of his marriage having broken down. I mean, keep in mind, I'm unemployed in that story. I'm like, what are we going to do? Compare misery? I mean, no. I don't want to go over to Dave. Well, then CLC a few months later says, actually, Dave is coming to my house tonight. Would you like to come and have a cup of tea? And this time, the Lord had arranged things. My wife was in the city doing a ministry day for children's ministry, and we had an event in South Auckland, one of those gender reveal parties. And so I said, okay. Well, if I drive into the city and pick up Debs and then we go out to the gender reveal party, I can drop Debs back at her car and I'll be close by to your house, so I'll come by. So it's going to work out. I sat down and within a few seconds I realized that I had missed out on something my whole life because as soon as I heard Dave start talking, I realized, oh my goodness, there's instant connection here. He'd been a pastor, he'd been a counsellor, but his life was kind of really broken. And he had let his world shrink down to nothing. He wasn't seeing anybody. He was licking his wounds. He was out of church. He was out of everything. He was just living by himself and looking after his 8-year-old daughter during the week. And his world had gotten incredibly small. So I decided, I'll proposition him. So I rang him one Saturday. He said, what are you doing? Well, of course, the answer was always nothing, because he never did anything. I said, you free tonight? And of course, he's a Christian, so he couldn't lie. So he said, no, I'm doing nothing. I said, good, come to my house for dinner. So he came and he sat on my deck, and we had dinner, and he doesn't really know me. I don't really know him, but I just knew this connection was really real. It was so lovely. My daughter came home, and I hadn't told her that he was coming over, so I yelled, your Uncle Dave's here. And my daughter's like, who the hang is Uncle Dave? And so she comes, and she sits, and she looks at him, and she looks at me, and she's like, oh my goodness, you're related. I'm like, yes, this is very cool. And at the end of the evening, I propositioned him. I said, well, here's the deal, Dave. I really felt like when I was at Susi's house with you that, man, there was just a real connection between you and me. And I don't know about you, but I've got space in my life for a new friend. And I don't know if you do, but, man, I'd love just to kind of, since we're cousins, maybe we could just, like, skip steps and become, like, great friends immediately and just do it. And he just almost burst into tears on the spot. He wouldn't even believe it for months. I would keep reaching out and saying, come over for dinner. Let's go and do this. Let's go and do that. And he was like, why do you want anything to do with me? Like, my life sucks. I am, divorced and broken and a shell of myself. And I kept saying to him, yeah, but the thing is, I can see you. I can see you. See, we long to be known, right? I can see you. I can see past all the pain. I can see past all the junk. I see you. When it came November of that year, U2 was coming to town, and Dave explained to me that he was the greatest U2 fan of all time. And he wasn't kidding. He has every U2 book, every U2 record, every U2 everything. So I thought, okay. And initially I said, you want to go to U2 together? He says, it's too late, my sister's taking me. I'm like, okay, all right, but I got to do something. So I had this brainwave. I thought, how can I communicate to him that I see him? So I thought, I'll get a T-shirt made. And I'll put his name along with the members of U2, like he's the missing member. And I ring Susi. I said, Susi, should I put Dave? Because, the members of U2 have cool names like Bono and Edge. And, okay, there's Adam and Larry, but will Dave? Turned out that Dave's surname is Hinchco, and he used to be known as Hinch. A lot of Daves in the world, so he was Hinch. And he was Hinch back in the day where he used to run a soup kitchen for the poor in Auckland CBD. Back in a time where he felt good about being Hinch. Back in a time where he felt like he was being the person God made him to be. So he loved the idea of being Hinch, but nobody called him Hinch anymore because those days seemed like they were in the rearview mirror. So I made him a T-shirt. And Hinch became the missing member of U2. He spent the night weeping and said that it was as if the pain was now melting away from his life. Such is the power of friendship. Such is the power of being seen. This is the thing that others are yearning for. This is the thing that you and I are yearning for somebody to see us. I came up with this little phrase because he keeps saying it all the time. Why do you want to be friends with me? I'm like nothing like I used to be. And I just say this to him, because it's quite simple, Dave. You make everything better. A meal is better when you're at it. A movie is better when you're at it. You make things better. He says, I don't know how that's true, but I'll believe you. Auckland, we've had more lockdowns than you. We're way more experienced. And we're getting good at it. We're really getting quite good at it. And I think it was March of this year, actually, we went into lockdown again for a little while. Just that little bitty one. Well, I should tell you a little bit of the backstory. Part of the pain of Dave's life was that Dave at age 14, can I tell you Dave's testimony for just a second? You'll love this. Dave was the introvert, the quiet kid. Used to collect comics, loved comics, poured himself into the world of comics. But when he was 14, he decided that actually he didn't want to be alive anymore. So he made a plan to go into Auckland City and to kill himself. Took a knife with him, but he thought before he does that, I'll go into Myers Park, the ones at the top of Queen Street, and I'll read a comic. And he just purchased the Daredevil comic, where Daredevil becomes a Christian. and reads in a comic about a fictional, drawn character putting his faith in Jesus and decides that if it's good enough for Daredevil, it's good enough for him. And in Myers Park, without a soul around, prays and gives his life to Jesus. That knife now lives between two of the buildings on High Street because he just went to the place he was going to kill himself and dropped the knife. So he spent his life collecting comics, is what I'm saying. Well, when he got divorced, he had a lot of comics, thousands of comics. And because divorce brings out the worst in people, his wife decided not just to split his collection in half, but to split the collections in half. So if something had 10 issues, he could have 5 of them, and she would keep 5. Not that she ever intended to read them. So suddenly he had this useless collection he spent 30 years building. Well, anyway, at the beginning of the lockdown, he rings me. He says, look, you won't believe this, but my wife is selling the comics. I've seen them all come up on a collection, and they're being sold by some other guy, but I'm absolutely sure they're my collection. Well, I'm going to do something about that. So this is what I did. I went on Facebook, and I simply explained the situation. I set it so that he and his wife couldn't see the post. And I told the story about how Dave had decided to continue to work part-time so that he could be available to look after his daughter Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of every week. So he works on the weekend, doesn't work during the week. And he doesn't have the money to buy back the comic collection. So then, oh no, it's a bit more bullshit than that too. I went through his friend list on Facebook and started sending the message to individuals. And I said, oh, I could have set up a Give a Little page, but I won't. Here's my bank account. And we called it Hinch's Heroes. We set aside a bank account. In the next 4 days, friends, $3,500 was deposited by people who didn't even know Dave some of the time, and some of his old friends who he was convinced didn't want to know him anymore. So I went and collected the comics. After a little while, I had to tell the guy who I was buying I went and bought one lot of comics from the guy. Before the second one, I thought, I should tell this guy, right? So I rang the guy and said, look, you're selling the comics from the wife. I'm buying them for the husband. This is what he said. That woman's given me nothing but grief. And he says this, when I got divorced, the lawyers tried to make me sell my comic collection to pay for the legal fees. I'll do everything in my power to get these comics back in the hands of their rightful owner. Well, when I delivered those comics to Dave, I have never seen a man cry so hard and so deep. But here is the thing. It was not about the comics. This is what he said to me. He said, you have made it impossible to believe anymore that my friends don't love me. I've believed since we broke up that my friends want nothing to do with me, that I'm persona non grata, that I'm every man's enemy, and yet every time I look around my lounge, I see piles and piles and piles of evidence of love. Do you know what Dave's doing now? He's counselling with me. He is now working as an intern, counselling again, and he says it all comes down to knowing that friends really loved him and hadn't given up on him. But I understand that you might be sitting here today thinking, man, well, I got no friends. Not many, not enough, or I don't see them. And I know a lot of Christian men actually would just say, well, I got a friend. She's my wife. And that's good. The problem is, that's too big a burden for one lady to carry. As good as your wife is, she cannot be an entire friendship circle. She can't do it all. She can't be all that. I know it's a good start, but man, don't put it all on the one. So here's what to do. One is to realize friends are not just like one type of person. There are a whole list and profiles. And this is just from a book called Vital Friends. And this is just a good starting point for thinking about what's missing from my team. You see, when I came back from Australia, I realized my team had shrunk and it had gotten too narrow. So I started to look around and think, man, who do I need in my life right now? Do I need the builder? Do I need someone who sees the potential in me, who can see what I'm capable of, who puts a skill or something, a gift inside of me, helps me flourish in a certain way? Do I need a champion? My champion's name is Beresford. For the first 15 or so years of our friendship, he was Barry. And then on his 50th birthday, he got it in his head that he should be known by the name on his birth certificate, so he's Beresford now. Do you know how hard it is to change someone's name after 15 years? It's hard. And so, but Beresford is my champion. He was the guy that through the unemployment would say this to me. Every time I'd say, oh man, I missed out on another job, he'd be like, well, I just don't get that. Do they not understand who Aaron Ironside is? Do they not understand how amazing you are? Do they have a clue what they've missed out on? He was the guy that when we moved into the new house, stood on the deck of the new house, not with an ounce of jealousy or anything in his heart, and he just looked around and he goes, now this is what Aaron Ironside deserves. That's a champion. I'm going with my champion to Rarotonga next Friday. Don't worry, we'll take our wives as well. We're going to have a lovely holiday with our 19-year-old daughters. This is going to be the weirdest holiday ever. I'm sure there'll be a testimony for next time. I realized I had way too many collaborators, way too many friends who I shared a hobby in common with, but it wouldn't go any further. Look, collaborators are great. I love having some mates to watch rugby with, to cook low and slow barbecue with. I like that, it's fine. It's just not enough for me. And I had too many of them, and too often for us Christian men, church mates are our go-to collaborators. Again, nothing wrong with it. I just want to suggest that maybe we need to move the friendship on to something else. The companion, I like that one. He'll be at the police station at 3 a.m. with bail money. Like that. I laugh because my companion is a cop, of course, so he'd probably be there before I am. The connectors are very helpful. Better identify some connectors in your life. See, CUC played the connector, didn't he? Dave needs a friend. Aaron needs a friend. I'll connect them. Connectors are helpful. The energizer. Man, you just need to find someone who makes life feel good. Just needs the mind opener, man. And it's been a really fascinating time for me because without being a pastor anymore and with having to work in so many other settings to earn a living, I've had to engage with all different kinds of people that I frankly had little to do with. And initially, I bristled. All these people with all these funny ideas. But I've quite enjoyed it. It's quite good for us. Expands us. Deepens us, enriches us. And navigators. Again, in Christian circles, a lot of navigators, right? A lot of people want to tell you what you should do, what you need to do, where you should go. Keep your navigator list small, friends. Here's what I want to suggest you do when you get home. I suggest that you get a big piece of paper and you write your name in the middle of that paper. And you write the names of your friends and put them in their proximity to you currently. All right, that's the first step. Who's actually close, who's far away? Look, we're not saying this in a critical way. We understand some people are not as close as others. That's not a critique, that's just life. Here's the thing I want you to do that isn't on this chart. I want you to write an arrow under each name. And if they are someone who's moving towards you, put the arrow pointing towards you. And if there's someone who's moving away from you, put the arrow moving away. Because this is how you're going to work out where your next opportunity for deepening a friendship lies. It's a dynamic map of what's happening in your friendship world. And I want to suggest, take the path of least resistance. Find the ones who are moving closer, people who are ready to take your lead, who want what you want. Start to build a friendship with them. Realizing, of course, that the older we get, this idea of the best friend becomes less and less useful to us. Best friends are great when you're 8. But now, we just need to strengthen our friendship circle and not worry so much about whether or not they are, in fact, our best buddy, absolutely. So what to do? You notice that in my stories with Aaron and with Dave, in both stories, I endeavoured to make connection beyond the thing that had immediately drawn us together. In the case of Aaron, history draws us together. In the case of Dave, Siusi drew us together. And Brené Brown has offered a really great way of thinking about what connection really is. When I read it, I thought this finally makes sense to me. It's the third bit that makes the most sense. We get the first bit, don't we? That connection is that feeling, that energy, that experience of feeling seen, heard, valued. That's point number one, right? You can finally be yourself. Point number two, that in return, you don't get judgment. You don't get assessment. You don't get critique. You're able to be taken as you are, not as you wish you were. But here's the thing at the end of it that I love. That somehow this exchange gives you strength. That's the reason. That somehow it feels like I can go on. I knew that it was working with Dave when his 8-year-old daughter, Amelia, said this to him one evening after a couple of months of friendship. You should hang out with Uncle Aaron more. You're better after you talk to him. I wasn't his counselor. I wasn't offering him advice. I was just letting him feel seen and heard and valued without the pressure of judgment. This is what we're shooting for. I'm just helping you understand. How will you know when you're getting closer? You'll know you're getting closer when you're having more of these experiences. Now, for men, of course, they may happen in little windows. Not everybody's wired up like me for the D&M, the deep and meaningful. For a lot of men, it'll happen in little windows, little snippets. It'll happen while you are watching the game. When you'll hear the other man say, man, I really don't like my job anymore. I'm finding it really stressful that they just keep upping those targets and I just can't meet them. And I'm not sure if I can do this anymore. And you say, yeah, I can't imagine what that's like. To always feel like you're chasing it and never grabbing hold of it. And on the odd occasion that you do, they go and shift the goalposts. I get that. That must stink. And that might be it. That might be the exchange. And back to the rugby we go. And that's the moments that we're trying to get more of. I'm pointing in the wrong direction. You'll notice in my story that the key learning was that you need to initiate. I realized this because I was spending a lot of my time sulking about the fact that nobody else seemed to be initiating. So I had a counselling session with my good friend and supervisor and local counsellor, Richard Black. And Richard's great. And this is what he said to me at the end of the conversation. He said, well, Aaron, here's the thing. If you're really hungry for it and you'll starve without it, you should probably go and ask for it. Yeah, man, I could sit sulking, waiting. Oh, why does nobody ever call me? Why does nobody ever ask me? Why does nobody show any interest in me? Oh, yeah, I had that feeling, friend, over and over again. And I would, well, if they were a real friend, they'd do this. And if they really loved me, they'd do this. And then I just realized, man, I am hungry and I am starving and I better do something about it. So sure, it'd be great if others led, but hey, while they're working that out, why don't you start initiating? Why don't you take responsibility? Because really, that's all we can do. We can take responsibility for our part in the friendship. And at the end of the day, the great thing is that no matter what happens, because he's like, I can't promise you what's going to happen next. I don't know what will happen when you reach out to make more connection with the men in your world, when you try to strengthen a friendship. For some of you, you'll be like, man, this is the best advice I ever heard. As soon as I made the move, he said yes. We started having coffee together, and things started moving again. And for others, it'll be feeling like, I'm still banging my head against that brick wall. I don't know which way it's going to go. I do know if you're starving and you're hungry, you better do something about it. But at the end of the day, and this is the great thing, where our faith is so genuine and real, and there's a lot of talk in church circles about serving God, which is great. It's good to have purpose, good to know what you can do that makes the world a better place. You can give hands and feet to your faith. But remember that before Jesus told the disciples what to do, he said, the reason I'm going to tell you is why? You're my mates. You're my friends. That's the reason. That's the reason. You know, it's so tempting, like just hearing incredible, feedback about Luca's prophecies. It's just so tempting, isn't it, to think, man, when a prophetic word comes, it means there's things for me to do. Yeah, it means that, but before it means that, it means you must be his friend. Because God's only sharing plans with friends. And this becomes the place that launches us into every other friendship, is settling that one friendship is rock solid, one friendship is yours for eternity, and that friendship is the basis of all other friendships. So I leave you with Siosi. Siosi and I became friends when we met at Excel School of Performing Arts. The most unlikely of friends. We used to sit around singing worship songs together, reading the Bible together. And we had this little saying, Jesus is the reason for our friendship. See, that friendship with Jesus emanated out into some human relationships. And that in turn has emanated out into some more. So I wonder, friend, are you hungry? And you think of this friendship part of life? Are you happy? If you are, man, good. Good for you. I'm happy for you. Because I'm way happier now than I have been in a long time. So good for you. But I know there's plenty of men in this room right now thinking, well, I ain't happy. And I'm actually quite lonely. And I actually really am quite hungry. Hungry for connection. Hungry for real relationship. And if that's you, and you are hungry, would you stand so I can pray with you before we go from this place today? So if that's you, why don't you stand to your feet and let's pray together. If you're hungry for more friendship, for more connection, you want to take some relationships deeper, you can imagine. Now, if you're not standing, you must be the prayer team. Seriously. Well, that's not a joke. If you're not standing, you're the prayer team. So if you're not standing, it's your job now to reach out to a man who is and place a hand on a shoulder and let's pray together. Let's pray. Well, Father, in this room, men who want to be known, men who are worth knowing, men who make things better just by showing up. So, Lord, let's settle that. Every man here, let it sink into your heart today that I make things better just by showing up. That every group I'm part of is better because I'm there. Every friendship is better because I'm there. Because I bring value, because I'm of value. Before I speak, before I serve, I've added value. Let it be said. Let it be done in every heart, this truth. But Lord, see the hunger in the hearts of men today. The hunger to go deeper. The hunger to truly be known. The hunger to feel like it's okay for another human to know what it's like to be me. And to experience the strength and solidarity that comes when we inhabit the story together. And so, Lord, give courage. Give courage to every man who stood to be the one who'll stop sitting back and waiting and hoping and dreaming and wishing, and be the one who goes from this place and says, it's time to initiate. It's time to ask. You want to have a cup of coffee? Are you free on Thursday night? What's happening with you? And to reach out and to make that bid for connection that says, I want to know you. And Lord, I pray for favor. Let favor be present in every interaction. May there be openness and willingness and your Spirit bringing connection, that it might be said of these men, as it was said of David and Jonathan, that the Lord knit their hearts together, that they might know the true depth of friendship, the true depth of connection that can be shared man to man for the glory of God. And every man said, Amen.
Thanks, Aaron, for a fabulous message, another on-point message again. So, you know, the whole thing about friendship and that is really important. Sam and I have done a bit of travelling, not so much in a plane, but we've done it in a car, and it's like you do get a lot of information and a lot of good nuggets of bonding in a car for a long time. So, yeah, it's really good. So what do you think about connections and friendships, Sam?
Well, as guys, going in a car actually really works because we're not looking at each other, you know,
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
just driving along. Golf, I love playing golf. Paul doesn't play golf. He hasn't
I
got
do
the
badly.
Oh, well. But, you know, if you're just spending time with guys, doing something, it can be just going for a walk, doing some sport, just hanging out. Doesn't have to be over coffee or a meal, but that does help. But it's time, and just being there for each other really is so important. We do need friendships, guys. Hey, I do just want to say, if you didn't catch Pastor Luca's message on the Father Heart of God, it's a great message. These messages and other ones are available on the website promisekeepers.nz. I encourage you to check it out. If you're in a group right now, why don't you discuss what you heard from Aaron and what God really said to you and what you gleaned from that message? If you're watching by yourself at home, put your comments or thoughts in the chat below. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, just a thought for you. Just bought a red convertible Mustang, so our next road trip could be better.
I'm in.